Hello everybody, and you find me running to a bus stop. Now today is something a little bit different for you. Now when I went from Bridgwater to London by local bus in 24 hours, which by the way was a great adventure, and if you haven't seen that video, I recommend you go and check it out. It is a great video, it was a great video to make, and it really showed how Somerset's bus system and the buses on the bus system are really quite bad and lacking great features. Anyway, today is a behind the scenes video. I haven't done one of these before, and a lot of people have been doing them, and they have gotten quite a lot of views, but also I found them really interesting to watch, so I decided to make one myself. Now, a lot of people who film public transport on YouTube actually drive to their location where they're going to pick up the bus or the train or the plane, and then use that public transport to make a video, and then when they're going home, they use their car to get back home from the airport or the bus station or the railway station. However, whenever possible, I try to use public transport, and today was definitely no exception, since I actually live in Bridgwater, which is a small village just north of Bridgwater, and I wanted to do this entire thing by public transport from start to finish, whilst making the video and also not making the video. So here I am on the first bus, which is the local 21 service, operated by the Buses of Somerset, which is now known as First Bus in Somerset. This was one of the old Enviro 400s, which by the time this video goes out might already be gone. They're supposed to be going on Easter Sunday and in the days after Easter Sunday and Easter Monday, so who knows whether or not there'll be any left by the time this video goes out. Anyway, I took this on the 15-minute journey from Bridgwater to Bridgwater town centre. Arriving at Watson Lane bus station in Bridgwater. This is the main bus station and bus area where most of the buses stop in the town centre, and the 21 service that I got was actually the 21A, which goes via Monkston Heathfield instead of going straight to Taunton from North Petherton, and this was actually the first bus of the day, which departed Burnham-on-Sea at 6:16 and departed Bridgwater at 6:37. On the new timetable, this service actually runs a couple minutes later, and although it gets into Taunton at 7:36, on the new timetable, which starts on the 20th of April, I suppose it'll be the 22nd of April for this timetable because this is the weekday timetable, the service will arrive into Taunton at 7:43 instead. So I'm not really too sure why, but there we go. Anyway, before I got on my first bus of the adventure, I walked through to Bridgwater town centre and to the town centre itself, which is known as Cornhill, to film the intro to the video, which in the end I didn't actually end up using. It had my face in, which is fine. That hasn't happened for quite a while. However, I just sounded and looked awful, so I decided to cut that out and just get a picture of Cornhill itself, which is now a prezzo. After filming Cornhill, it was time to head on my first bus from the bus station, which would take me to Wales and then onwards to London. Speaking of London, here I am at Trafalgar Square, where all of the famous statues and touristy things are, at 22:30 at night, and if you don't know how to read a digital clock, that is 10:30 PM. Now, I was extremely tired at this point. It had been a great day, however, I was completely shattered. However, I still had quite a way to go before I went to my hotel and actually got there. because the hotel was the Holiday Inn Express Park Royal, which is actually in North Acton, not Park Royal. Now, last time I came to London, which was quite a few months ago now, the Premier Inn near Edgware Road Bakerloo line station was cheaper, and on this occasion that would have actually been easier to get to. However, the Holiday Inn Express at North Acton this time was once again cheaper, and to be honest it usually is, so this time I had to take 2 underground lines to get there instead of just the one which I would have taken to get to the Premier Inn at Edgware Road. Here I am at Charing Cross Underground Station, which is the closest station to Trafalgar Square, and the Bakerloo line part of this station actually used to be called Trafalgar Square. Anyway, I had to take this just 2 stops to Oxford Circus to change lines. Passing Charing Cross to head 2 stops up the Bakerloo line to Oxford Circus. Now, these are actually the oldest tube trains still in public service. These are the 1972 stock trains. However, they were looking more knackered than ever before. The outside was the same, it was still battered and knackered as what they'd always been. However, on the inside there was so much graffiti, I'm not too sure where that came from, because the underground, at least the trains themselves, have always been fairly graffiti-free until recently. The central line was much the same, however the trains did look a little more presentable. Anyway, here we are at Piccadilly Circus, where there are announcements telling you that pickpockets operate on the station. I'd actually never heard of this announcement before, however it is actually quite useful, especially if you're a tourist and didn't know that already. At Oxford Circus, where I had to change lines from the Bakerloo line to the Central line. Now the Bakerloo and Victoria lines here are combined, however the Central line is pretty much in a completely different part of the station with different platforms just for the Central line, whereas the Bakerloo and Victoria lines share platforms. I had to take the Central line all the way out to North Acton, and just by coincidence, that was where this train was going. It wasn't even going any further. I found that fascinating. The Central line is my favourite line on the Underground. It does get very hot and smelly in the summer and very congested and very, very busy at rush hour. However, I really like the noise that the train makes, and overall, the trains are quite nice. However, they are getting refurbished at some point, slowly and slowly. However, they are getting refurbished at some point, and I have seen the refurbishment, and it does ruin the trains quite a bit.
next station is North Acton, where this train terminates. All change, please.
Here I am now at North Acton, where my hotel was located. It was quite strange being here at 11 o'clock at night, since I'm usually here in the daytime and not at night. However, I was quite thankful at this point that no buses had actually been late and made me miss my connection, or for whatever reason I arrived into London later than expected, because this was a Monday night and the Central Line, and in fact the whole of the London Underground, finishes by around midnight, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and services don't resume until 5 o'clock in the morning. Whereas on a Friday and a Saturday night, the Central Line does run out to North Acton 24 hours a day and 24 hours a night. Anyway, I will see you in the morning, because I had a few things to do before my train departure back down west. Hello everybody, and welcome back to North Acton at around 8 o'clock the next morning. Now, my train didn't depart London Paddington, heading back down to the West Country until 11:03. However, there were a few things I wanted to do before I headed back down to the southwest and to Taunton, where I had to change trains. However, the only easy way to get from North Acton to the centre of London is by using the Central Line, if you haven't figured that out already. So here I am getting on my favourite underground trains, which are these lovely 1993 stock trains. Or is it 1992 stock? I'm not too sure, I can't remember. I don't really watch too much YouTube stuff on the Central Line anymore.
This is North Acton. Via Newbury Park.
City, which is another one of my favourite stations. And here we are now, near where the underground tracks actually swap over onto the opposite side. For some reason, it's due to the history of the railways in the area, the railway line swaps over in the underground section near Shepherd's Bush, and then re-emerges and swaps over again just after White City, heading out towards East Acton and beyond.
The next station is White City. Change here for the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines from Wood Lane. Alight here for Westfield, London.
Here I am leaving White City City, heading underground towards central London. Between White City and Shepherd's Bush, the Central Line actually travels underneath Westfield, London. This is the older of the two Westfields, and there is a newer Westfield shopping centre out at Stratford.
And we'll get it sorted. That's 61016. See it, say it, sort it.
Here I am now at Bond Street Station, which is my favourite station on the whole of the Underground network. However, I do quite like some of the Elizabeth line stations out on the east section of the line and on the western section of the line out towards Slough and Reading. However, this is technically not part of the Underground and is part of the National Rail system. My final destination, at least for now, was the Hamleys toy store, since they sometimes have some model railway stuff. However, the last couple of times I've been there, it has just been old Hornby rubbish. However, I got off at Bond Street instead of Oxford Circus, just because I really quite like Bond Street Station. It's about a 10 to 15 minute walk to get from Bond Street to Hamleys. Now, I did have quite a while before Hamleys opened, so I did stop at Starbucks along the way, since in this part of the country they don't have coffee number one. Here I am exiting Bond Street Station via the West 1 shopping centre. Bond Street Station itself has two entrances, however there's a third entrance into the West 1 shopping centre, and then all of the entrances from the West 1 shopping centre onto the surrounding streets have signs telling you that Bond Street Station is in there. Anyway, the West 1 shopping centre is not really a nice place to exit Bond Street Station. It's a decent shopping centre, however I prefer exiting Bond Street Station at one of the entrances on Oxford Street. Now, even though I did stop at Starbucks on the way, I still had a little while before the shop opened. So I decided to walk back up Regent Street to a really nice shop that sold really nice, but also really expensive chocolate. I did decide to treat myself and a few other people by buying chocolate from there. However, it was ridiculously expensive. About 10 or 15 minutes after the store opened. Now, at first thought, I just came in here just to see what they had. However, I did remember them selling a load of Go North East Corgi Volvo B90L Right Eclipse Gemini 2s. However, as I thought they would be, they were all sold out and there were none left. I couldn't even see anywhere on the shelf where they were. Maybe they hadn't been in there for quite a while. Anyway, at this point the closest station was Piccadilly Circus and the Bakerloo line would take me straight to Paddington. Maybe this is a bad thing. Anyway, I do quite like the Bakerloo line. I prefer the Central line, but the Bakerloo line will do. It has comfy seats and the trains have a nice atmospheric feel about them, although they are absolutely wrecked. Going down the escalators to the Bakerloo line. For some reason the station seems to have brown and green tiles, or is it red and green tiles? I'm just going to say it's brown and green tiles because the Bakerloo line is coloured brown on the tube map. Where's the blue for the Piccadilly line though? There's green for the District and brown for the Bakerloo. Considering that the station is called Piccadilly Circus, it seems a bit strange that the Piccadilly line isn't blue. Maybe it was originally green. I don't think so though. Here I am at the northbound Bakerloo line platform. I'll be taking this train to Paddington via Baker Street.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Mind the gap, please.
Sân Việt Nam như nếu hạ của chờ Oxford Street nữa.
To ZFL, London Zoo. This is a Bakerloo line train to Queen's Park. Please stand clear of the door.
Here I am at Baker Street, which is of course where Sherlock Holmes is based. Now did you notice that at Regent's Park, the previous stop, they announced that you could change to local buses to take you to London Zoo? You can do that, however Camden Town Station is actually a lot closer to the zoo than Regent's Park.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Change for the Circle, the Hammersmith City Line, the Elizabeth Line, and the National Rail Line.
Here we are arrived in Paddington. Did you notice that the announcement had actually been changed because the Elizabeth Line had actually opened a few years ago and the Bakerloo Line trains entered service in 1972, so the announcement has had to be updated, which, well, it sounds pretty awful now, to be honest. It's not as bad as the Northern Line ones though. Jeez man, they're awful. However, I think they have been permanently changed now. Anyway, this is where I would leave the Underground and head up to the mainline station to head on my Great Western Railway train to Taunton, or I would have to change trains. Now going up the escalators at Paddington Bakerloo Line station. Now what I don't get is that a lot of people complain that major underground stations, such as Paddington, do not have step-free access or do not have very good step-free access. So a few months ago, when the Paddington Elizabeth Line station opened, they added step-free access to the Bakerloo Line as well. So you could get from the National Rail station to the Bakerloo Line station, you just have to go via the Elizabeth Line station. However, they've put in all of these lifts and they've cost quite a lot of money, and yet somebody was trying to use the escalators with their pram. No wonder you're struggling to get it on there. And what's even worse is that the lift is literally opposite the escalators. You can literally see it from the escalators, so who knows what was wrong with that person. Speaking of escalators, here are some even newer escalators. These are even newer than the lifts, since these are part of the new Paddington Square development, which is outside the station. This is where there used to be some sort of loading area, and it was quite dingy to be honest. However, there was this big wall with GWR posters on, and this is where all of the smokers would come to smoke and vape. I'm not too sure where they go now, since there's nowhere for them to hide. Where our train would unusually depart today to head down to Plymouth. Now, trains like this don't usually depart from platform 11. Usually platforms 10 to 14 are usually the local Elizabeth Line or Great Western Railway trains. Usually Great Western Railway trains, usually the Class 287s. so I found it quite strange that a Class 800 was leaving from platform 11. It didn't really go down very well since the ticket barriers here are quite narrow and quite small since it's designed for local trains instead of express trains. Nevertheless though, my train departed bang on time at 11:03. I just had to get there first.
Level this way, please.
Welcome aboard Great Western Railway's 11:03 service from London Paddington through to Plymouth. We'll be calling at Reading, Taunton, Tipton Parkway, Exeter St David, Newton Abbot, Totnes and Plymouth.
Here I am arriving into Reading, which is one of my favourite stations. Since it was rebuilt, the station now looks really modern and really quite cool, and it has loads of platforms, and there's trains departing every few minutes, so it's great for train filming or train spotting. Now I've been here on the bus as well. I quite like Reading in general. The town centre is really nice and modern, and it gives Exeter vibes, to be honest. The station is just way better than Exeter St David's station. The buses here are in all sorts of different colours, and the buses themselves were nice and clean and modern, and they were extremely reliable. The city centre was quite nice as well, with lots of shops and eateries, and on the outskirts the housing estates weren't too shabby either. Overall, I really quite like Reading. It's a mix of old and new. Now, after Reading, the train went straight to Taunton. However, it got extremely busy and very crowded and very noisy. So in the end, I decided to cut straight to Taunton, where I thought I had around a 4-minute connection. I would have made the connection anyway. However, it turned out there'd actually been a points failure at Bridgwater, even though they'd fixed the exact same point a few months earlier. What's going on here?
Service to Hampton.
In the end, I would have made this train anyway, because there's a London Paddington bound train in the platform anyway. By the way, this is the rarely used platform 4. Because of a fault with the tracks on platform 5, all of the northbound trains have to use platform 4, which is rarely ever used. Usually only platforms 2, 3 and 5 are used, with platform 6 sometimes being used to terminate trains from Cardiff and Bristol. Now, my train was actually supposed to be the 13:11 service. However, this train ended up going straight to Bristol Temple Meads via Westbury and Bath Spa, with my train actually being the train an hour before that. Or so I thought. This is what they were telling us.
So anyone from Bridgwater, Highwich and Preston will be running a bus service within the next 10 minutes or so. We'll give you information when the buses have arrived. Due to points where no trains can run to Bridgwater. So this train is going via Westbury, so it's not through any of the stations, Bridgwater, Highbridge, Preston, Wirral, Gatton, Aylesbury. It's going fast to Bristol via Westbury.
What have you been saying to you?
Between Taunton and Bristol. We are just waiting for confirmation that that line has been reopened. Due to a points failure, we are just waiting for Network Rail to rectify that problem. Once the line has been fixed and reopened, we will make our way through up towards Bristol Temple Meads. This will be the next available service calling at Highbridge, Bridgwater, and on through towards Bristol and onwards to Cardiff. So my apologies for the continued delay. We are just awaiting the line to reopen. As soon as so I have just received a phone call and got an update from our control centre. It is news. I'm not going to say it's good news, but it is news. So there is a train that is going to trial pass through the area. However, Network Rail are requesting a 40-minute block of that line from this moment.
You what?
Network Rail are requesting a 40-minute block. So it is going to be a further 40 minutes. We are going to be delayed here at Taunton. So my apologies for this. I can only apologise, but we are going to be here for at least a further 40 minutes.
Yeah, so in the end, I decided to get the bus. Simply because they said it was going to be another 40 minutes before the train actually moved. However, if you look on real-time trains, the train was sat there for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then it went to Bridgwater and Highbridge. What was that? I took the bus for no reason. It's a good job I have a bus pass, otherwise I would have wasted £1.50 again. Anyway, I'm going to leave the video here because I can't really be bothered to edit anymore. I have quite a lot to do. So, yeah. Apologies, it is supposed to be a behind the scenes video, even though I've cut it here. However, basically, I got 33712 to Bridgwater, did some stuff around Bridgwater, and then got another bus back home. I'm not too sure what the vehicle was then. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye everyone!